And we're on, and I'm on, and you're watching. And this is Eric Chessen, founder of Autism Fitness, leading the movement for movement and bringing you another edition of Autism Fitness Tuesday Training. And before we get even further with this, please definitely subscribe, keep that count going up so that more and more people find out about the autism fitness here and are able to bring outstanding fitness and adapted PE programs to the autism and neurodivergent individuals that they serve. So once you have completed that, we may start. We'll take a moment. All right, moment's up. So in this edition of Autism Fitness Tuesday Training, I want to dial it into specifics of programming, because a program, we have a general structure. If you're already an Autism Fitness Certified Pro, you know this. And if you are not, well, it's time to get on that. But in the meantime, I'll talk a little bit about how we structure our programs. We generally have 3 phases of movement in a session. That session typically runs on the adapted PE side. Maybe you only have 35 or 45 minutes for your session in a one-to-one or group program. Maybe we have 45 or 55 minutes, which is beautiful because that gives us more time to get more done. More sets, more reps, more volume, more intensity, more to do, right? So we have our 3 phases of movement. We have our warm-up, which is somewhat self-explanatory, but I'll get into it a little bit. Warm-up is basic locomotive and motor planning patterns. Of course, everything is motor planning, but more on the general movement side. So we'll do single leg hurdle steps. We'll do an overhead band walk to get a little bit of shoulder mobility going, not excessively, because some athletes are actually hypermobile, but enough that we maintain tension on the band and get a good overhead movement going for those who can do that. Very, very simple warm-up. We do not spend a lot of time in warm-up because we want to progress it over to power, which is the demonstration, the execution, the production of force while stabilizing with the trunk and rooting with the feet. And then the bulk of our program, pun somewhat intended, is going to be in the strength and strength endurance category. So we want to spend the majority of that session time in strength and strength endurance. So the way that we develop the program is going to be a little bit in warm up, a little bit more in power, and then the majority in strength and stability. Now, when we are working with the autism and neurodivergent population, of course, there is a large spectrum of different individuals from independent and self-advocates to individuals who need a lot of one-to-one support. So the session structure, even though we have this general framework, might change a little bit depending on that athlete, particularly with their adaptive style. Now, in the Autism Fitness curriculum, we do everything by the PAC profile. That's physical, adaptive, and cognitive. So adaptive, when we're talking about motivation and the focus that an athlete has to engage in that fitness curriculum, that's going to be a big deal, and it's going to give us a lot of information that is actionable, meaning we're going to take that information and use it in designing our program. So, for example, we may initially, in the first couple sessions, have an athlete who is only willing to do 1 set of a particular exercise, and then we need to move on to the next one. So the goal from a physical perspective is certainly to have enough sets and reps, total volume, and practice with that exercise that the skill set builds up so we can actually have that training effect, something that I talk over and over and over about, because the training effect is where the exercise is actually doing what it is supposed to do and getting the athlete stronger, more stable, moving better, because just having an exercise is not the same as the exercise having the benefit that it is supposed to do. That's why we have good programming. That's why we have excellent coaching. That's why we need to understand these things from the vertical and then depth-wise also, and understanding what the exercise is supposed to do, how it's supposed to look, how it's supposed to be performed, and how we coach it as well. So if we have an athlete who is only willing to do 1 set right now, our goal is to build up to 2 and 3 and 4 and maybe even 5 sets for that athlete so they have sufficient practice with that exercise. Again, so the exercise is doing what it's supposed to do. But that may not be the case in the first couple of sessions. So the goal might be looking over the next few sessions, the goal might be implementing that second or third set of that squat or overhead press or modified push-up or a band row. So how do we get this done? Well, number one, we can let the athlete know ahead. Social stories can be very helpful here, or just having an exercise board of the exercise, preparing the athlete in advance that today we're going to be doing 2 sets, or can we try 2 sets of, again, this squat or press or row or whatever it is. The other way that we can explore sometimes is not necessarily doing the sets in a linear fashion, meaning set of squats and then rest, or a set of squats and then set of some other exercise and come back to the squats. What we might do, if an athlete is getting overwhelmed or frustrated with one particular exercise, is we can have that set of squats done, and then we can do a few more exercises. Maybe the athlete is perfectly comfortable doing 3 sets of band rows, or they're perfectly comfortable doing band pull downs or presses or heavy carries. And then later on, we can use that exercise, that squat, in towards the end of a session. And typically towards the end of a session, motivation is pretty high, particularly if for the athlete, the exercise itself does not carry the highest level of reinforcement right now. And we have a lot of athletes for whom exercise is not their favorite thing, and they are working to be done. It's a negative reinforcer in that they want the removal. They want it to be done and finished. And we definitely see that, especially in the short term or in the beginning of implementing fitness programs. It can be overwhelming, anxiety provoking for the athlete. So we're not going to pretend that it's their favorite thing on the face of the planet right now. It might be later, but for right now. So this athlete is definitely having a challenging time with this particular exercise. It's non-preferred of all the less preferred exercises. So we can have them do 1 set of it in the beginning, and then towards the end, when they're highly motivated because the session is ticking down, we can have them do another set and a high degree of reinforcement for completing that last set. Now, from a physical perspective, is that second set of exercise of that squat or that press or whatever else, is it going to have the greatest amount of training effect? No, because it's happening it's not happening close enough to that first set that you're really accounting for that muscular fatigue or that volume that we're looking for. The athlete has had a very long time physically to recover from that set of squats or whatever. So from a training perspective, from a physical perspective, it's not necessarily the most effective way to program. But when we're looking at that adaptive component, then it certainly makes sense to build in. So the athlete has had a long cool off or break time between doing 1 set of squats and the other set of squats. So another consideration here, and this is why it's so important to understand how our athletes operate and what works best for them, is sometimes an athlete completes that first set or the second set of that exercise and they are done. And if we try to reintroduce that exercise later in the session, they are not going to have it, because the completion of that exercise the first time means the completion of that exercise the first time. So we have an athlete who is going to be more rigid around that. And if that's the case, then using that set of squats in the beginning of their strength phase, and then at the end of the session, towards the end of that strength phase, is not going to be the most successful or conducive to success process, because this athlete is done once they are done, and we're not going to reintroduce it. So in that situation, we might want to go all the way back to what I mentioned earlier and have 1 and then eventually 2 sets of the exercise performed concurrently. Again, what we call a straight set, or even a superset. So they do the squat and then they do some other preferred exercise. Could be a band pull down, could be a band row, push up, whatever it is, and then they come back to that squat. Again, expectations are really important here. So some type of visual system, or checking in with the athlete and making sure they understand, hey, you've got X amount of sets of squats and then band rows. So first you're going to do squat, then band rows, then take a break, and then you can come back, squats and band rows. Because the things that we sometimes assume are going to be implied are not always implied. And I've had great success with athletes who, on a dry erase board, are able to check off that they've completed an exercise. It's really successful, and it gives them a visual representation of what they've completed and what they have yet to complete as well. So great practice. In fact, I do that in my own training with my Renaissance periodization app. Yes, a plug to the RP hypertrophy app there, and looking at what I have to do next. And it keeps me on track, and it gives me an understanding of what's going on, what place I am in the training session, and what else needs to be completed. So a couple different ways that you want to structure your program, not just from the program design standpoint in that what is going to be most effective from a physical perspective, but looking at it as what is going to work for this athlete. Some athletes are perfectly cool with whatever, whenever, as far as exercises, and it can be as random as possible. Of course, we don't want it to be random because that's not going to produce the greatest training effect, but they're cool to go along with every and anything. That's where we are responsible for structuring it in an intelligent way. And then there are some athletes who need that structure. So it's good, it works out that there are 3 or 4 sets of squats in a row followed by 3 sets of band rows in a row. And the other thing to add to this is choice is definitely a factor. So we will always want to invoke and incorporate choice with our athletes. So the classic and the working example of that is we'll ask an athlete, do you want to do push throws first or overhead throws? And the athlete one day picks overhead throws, and then the next day, the next session, they pick push throws. But some athletes will always want the same order of that exercise. Once we have done it a particular way, that becomes the particular way. And that's fine. We still want to give them the option of, hey, maybe one day, 2 years in, they choose to do push throws instead of overhead throws first, which again is in some cases practically miraculous. But we still want to go towards the side of giving the athlete that option, even if the option is always going to be the same order every time, and we can build from there. So when we're taking this on a case-by-case basis with the athlete and following along with that pack profile methodology, the physical is going to tell us how we need to program, at least in terms of what exercises we're going to use, what exercises we're not going to use, and the exercises that we are using, how we're going to modify or progress, coach, and cue those as well. And then that adaptive functioning is sometimes going to have a lot to do with the order of exercises that we're going to use. Yes, which exercises we include, which we don't, and how we put those exercises together as well. Again, for those athletes who are just waiting for the session to be over, we might want to put some of the more challenging exercises towards the end so that there's a high level of motivation to complete the exercise. And then for those athletes who just want to be done with that exercise, that's fine. We can put it a little bit earlier. And then for the athlete who needs a long period of being able to self-regulate between set 1 and set 2, we put set 1 earlier in the session, and then we put set 2 later in the session, understanding that it's not going to have the greatest physiological benefit, but to sustain that athlete's motivation and performance of that exercise, that may be the best way to go. All of this is really complex. It's also really important, and that's why there's the Autism Fitness Pro certification. If you have not learned about it just yet, go to autismfitness.com. There's a link in the description below. And if you are ready to become a certified pro and bring the best possible fitness and adaptive PE programs to the autism and neurodivergent population that you serve, well, the movement for movement is for you. You can learn more, of course, on autismfitness.com. Please, if this has been helpful for you, and if it is helpful for someone that you know, like and then share that and subscribe to the Autism Fitness here. I would love to know how this impacts your current programs. Definitely leave me a comment below. And if there's a question, a subject, something that you want me to cover in a future edition of Autism Fitness Tuesday Training, leave that in the comments below. Also, I'd love to read those. Thank you for watching. I am Autism Fitness founder Eric Chessen, leading the movement for movement, and this has been another edition of Autism Fitness Tuesday Training.